Hello, everybody. This is Peter speaking from the future or the present, depending on how you look at it. I just wanted to give a little note about this week's episode. It was still the time where Christine and I did not have real mics. This sound is particularly tough to listen to, so I want to warn you about that. But as with a few other episodes, I wanted to still put them up because I really enjoy the content and the effort that we put into putting together this podcast. This was recorded May 18th, 2020, just to give you context of the COVID talk that we were still fresh on our minds at the time. And I hope you enjoy. My name is Peter Cho, and with me is
Christine Brooks.
And this episode is about infections and horror. And the two movies we're going to discuss are John Carpenter's The Thing and David Cronenberg's Shivers, also known as They Came From Within. And as of this recording, and I'm sure many recordings to come, we're still in lockdown and still isolating and still focusing on the topics of COVID-19 in our analysis, hence The Thing and Shivers.
Yeah, I think these were like the first two movies we thought of when we're thinking of like infections. And they kind of just came together pretty naturally.
When you go out for groceries, as we have all been doing, of course you have to be careful, but are you terrified of going to the store and just thinking, oh my God, this could be the day that I get it?
Yeah, each time I go out, as soon as I'm leaving the apartment, I don't feel like I'm scared until I get to the store. And then it's not that I'm scared, it's just I notice every little thing now. So I am wearing a mask when I go into shops, which I wasn't really doing at the beginning. I'm just noticing like everything feels closer than it was before. All the aisles feel smaller. I still go into work a couple days a week, so my work now has a sign up saying you have to wear a mask in all the common areas. So yeah, it's getting to me to the point where, like, I don't know if this is happening to you, but I'm watching shows or movies, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, they're too close to each other. Oh my God, they're touching. Like, there's a little part of me that when somebody goes to touch another character in a show, I like get a little bit of a reaction from it. And then I realize how ridiculous that is. But yeah, I think it might be getting to me a little bit.
Even to this day, unless it's directly related to something and I'll watch a movie, I generally don't relate it to real life. I was watching a Parks and Rec episode from, I think, 2010. And there was an episode where everybody had the flu, and it was like this infection, and everybody's wearing masks. And I was like, okay, this isn't funny right now, because it's not about what we're going through, but it was just so precise. And so it just, that reminded me way too much of what we were going through now. When I do go out, I'm very wary of other people and just being very careful, but it's not me honestly being afraid of getting it. It's my annoyance is just watching people just not be careful. I think that for me, like I think there is a way for our society and our world to function with this disease still around. It's like you just have to be very careful, be clean, and this whole thing about washing hands, I was like, don't you all wash your hands in general? Like I just pointed out, people don't. I was like, wait, why is this such a revelation? And then that was very upsetting.
So what you're saying is I'm at a more advanced stage of paranoia than you.
But you can't help it. Like everybody's going through stuff like this, and I mean that's why we're sort of analyzing these kind of movies to sort of see different things and see how things alter our view and how movies and TV shows discuss these type of issues,
When you were watching these, did it pop into your mind? Were there any moments subconsciously that made you relate now, or were you still able to detach?
Well, watching these two movies, which I've seen many times, The Thing, more times than I can count, I was looking at them specific ways. So certain things did pop out to me where they normally didn't. I really enjoyed both movies. Shivers, I don't watch that much because I do find it pretty crude, but I do love Cronenberg. So it's with a lot of things I realized at this point that I'll think of a director and I'll want to watch one of their movies. Now I'm just cherry picking like their top three.
Hmm.
My immediate response is to watch The Fly if I want to watch a Cronenberg movie. So this one's sort of way down there, but me watching it again, I was like, this is his first movie, and he's had it right away. Like he just had clear view, and his technique and his style was there from the beginning, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think we both are pretty big fans of Cronenberg, but I'd actually never seen Shivers before. But I felt the same thing where I was like, it is crude and it is a first feature, but I think even for a first horror feature, it's still pretty good. And I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight because we both know so much about Cronenberg and his movies that it does feel like you can see something is there. Like there's something interesting about this guy. It's just a little weirder. There's some tongue-in-cheek moments that you can kind of tell. Yeah, he had an idea of who he wanted to be even at this point, which is kind of fun to watch.
I would say I was a bigger fan of Cronenberg than Carpenter when I first started getting into horror movies, which was probably the early 80s for me, where I used to be terrified of horror movies as a really young kid because I was like, I don't want these images and they're really creepy. And then as I grew up, I think it was me getting over that fear. And in the 80s, as you remember, there's such a huge explosion of horror movies and practical effects. And I think that was like the high point of that. And there's Fangoria magazines, like, oh, I can actually learn how they did this stuff. So learning how they produced this dispelled all my fears, and it made me more interested in filmmaking in general. It's like, oh, this is
Mm-hmm.
the magic to it. And when Cronenberg was making Videodrome and The Fly, it was just right in my wheelhouse. Plus, I started studying film more, and I thought, I don't really know that many Canadian filmmakers. And I thought, David Cronenberg is Canadian. I just loved his stuff, and it was just this perfect fusion and timing for me. And Carpenter, I don't know that I really pieced it together, even though you should know all of his movies because it always says John Carpenter for the title. Like he always worked that into his contracts, and then I started piecing things together. Where it's like, oh, this is the same guy who made Halloween, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, Escape from New York. It's just like, oh god, this guy's amazing too. So, like this particular podcast is very exciting to me because I do love both of these directors.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, the theory behind this or anything, but like you mentioned, it's always John Carpenter's, and then whatever movie he's made. And I mean, Cronenberg doesn't do it as overtly as Carpenter, but they both really put themselves at the forefront and make you remember this is a Cronenberg movie, this is a Carpenter movie, purpose or not, were like trying to establish themselves as auteurs in a way within the horror genre, which not a lot of people were really doing at that point. And it worked. It totally worked because now everybody knows John Carpenter's made these movies, even if you're not a huge fan. Whereas with like something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you and I might know it's Tobe Hooper because we're into the genre, but tons of people have seen that movie and they wouldn't be able to name the director.
Everybody who loves horror movies kind of knows what happened to the thing when it was released, where it came out in '82 and people just hated it.
Mm-hmm.
I do find it funny that John Carpenter blames E.T. for its utter failure because it came out like a week before and people loved, oh, it's what an alien and it's so cute and heartwarming. Oh, The Thing is what an alien. Let's take a look at this. And they're just completely horrified and upset. What I did learn for the very first time in this research was not only was The Thing released a week after E.T., Blade Runner was released on the same day as The Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Both those movies were sort of immediately dismissed, and at this point, both of them are viewed as two of the greatest movies, in genre history.
Mm-hmm.
That came out, so maybe it is all to do with timing, people not being ready or just not, you know, being receptive to what they wanted at the time.
Mm-hmm. I think that's another reason, like, I mean, sort of saying who did it better, but it's not really a competition. It's more just like weighing ideas against each other and what is more successful for us personally, I think. But like there's so much that these films have in common, including obviously infection, isolation, the spread of disease, paranoia. It's like the timing of each of these films releases plays into like a really important history of each of them. So it's just another element that they have in common that they both deal with in similar ways, but there's also these opposite ways that they deal with the same subject that I think are kind of like complementary to each other.
Exactly. I think we should probably clarify at this point. I don't think we have where, yeah, exactly. It's not competition between the two. It's just finding similar plots or just similarities between two films or two shows and how they're presented very differently and how you can present it differently. And that's what the purpose of our discussions are.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily better. Like I think I like the word successful, but still in a subjective way. Because like what's successful, in my opinion, you might not think was successful for your experience of watching it either. It's an interesting way, as you said, to see how different directors, actors, writers deal with similar narrative themes, and how when you play it out one way, the context that comes along and the effects that come along as a viewer versus the other way. John Carpenter's The Thing, released 1982. U.S. team of researchers in Antarctica discover that an alien crash landed thousands and thousands of years ago, and was subsequently released by accident by another research team nearby. And it is the shape-shifting, imitating, kind of unseeable force that infiltrates the station. And they have to fight to survive, but also fight to try to stop the spread of the alien within their camp and beyond into the rest of the world.
Shivers was released in 75, also known as Parasite Murders, and They Came From Within. And the plot of the movie is basically a scientist was doing experiments with parasites, and it begins with him actually like murdering this teen girl in an apartment complex. He kills her and himself because he realized he has unleashed something horrendous on humanity. And unbeknownst to him, she's been kind of sleeping around, and she has passed a bunch of parasites to other people in this posh apartment complex, which the film opens with saying, this is a paradise. This is where all the world is going to. You can just stay in this one place. Everything will be there, and this will be all you need in life. But all they get are a bunch of parasites who sort of infect people by generally going into their mouths or any orifices, really. And then it takes over them. And you don't get the exact reasoning, but scientists and dreams, which we'll get to later on, sort of describe what the purpose of these parasites are, which are to take over humanity and basically turn you into a sex maniac. You just go into your basic urges, which I don't know if that's what Cronenberg was saying what humanity is, but it goes in there. And once they see a non-infected person, the parasites seem to want to infect this. So it's similar to The Thing, where it's like, you don't have a parasite, you must all be one of us. We will all have parasites and be happy in the world. And I think we should begin with the infection and the body horror. I think it's generally agreed upon that it has like the best practical effects of all time. Like when you first saw it, actually, when I always ask this, do you remember when it was? Was it?
You know, I never remember when I see anything, but I can tell you generally, I was an adult. and I'd already seen a lot of horror movies, especially to this point. So I want to say within the last 15 years. And again, watching it now, the special effects, there's moments where it doesn't necessarily look really real, but it always looks cool. You know what I mean? Like sometimes taking out of it and you're like, oh, okay, I can see that's kind of dated, but it's still, and was at the time when I first saw it, like really shocking and exciting the way that they made these like in between alien human bodies look. I just loved it. I thought it was great.
I think it also gets a pass in terms of, it doesn't look realistic in the sense of like, oh wow, that's something that's moving, but because it's an alien, it's like, oh, okay, so it looks a bit off, but that's because the alien hasn't quite gotten it right. So then I just look at it, just complete, this is perfect. Like, it just blows my mind. And at that time, I don't actually specifically remember when I saw it. I think it was on TV, like when CTV showed it. So it was, I think, uncut, because I don't remember ever watching it and thinking, oh, I never saw these shots before. But the biggest thing that I noticed when I finally did see it, even just widescreen, is like, oh god, this is so beautifully shot.
Oh my God, yes.
And it's always the same whenever I watched Ghostbusters Pan and Scan, you see two of the four. The camera would just go, okay, it's always going to be on Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray. And then for The Thing, it's just always on Kurt Russell. And then when I finally saw it, I was like, oh yeah, there's like 6 guys on either side of him because they couldn't fit it in that version. So I was like, for me, it really did help with the claustrophobia. It's like, oh yeah, all these characters are in this shot stuck together, as opposed to just being almost like a close-up of 2 characters because of the pen and scan.
I did notice, like, just to jump in on that topic, watching it again this time, how beautiful it is. Like the cinematography and the shots that they produce are just so, from the beginning, are like composed beautifully, colored beautifully. Like every little detail was exactly what I wanted it to be. Like the contrast of like the starting it on with the vast landscape, sort of barren, harsh looking landscape where you can clearly see how isolated they are, but then like contrasting that to the shots indoors that are really confined, or as you said, you can see all of the men in the space together, and like that contrast of like terrifying vastness and terrifying closeness, I think is just brilliant. And then like add in all the lighting and those blues off of the white snow, and then the oranges and pinks of the flares. It just creates such a beautiful look and like a really intense mood as well. And I guess I hadn't noticed that the last few times I watched it, but I really noticed it this time. And it just plays well stylistically, and it plays well thematically. So it's just another reason why I loved it.
I don't actually remember in context of when I watched Shivers for the first time. It was probably after watching Videodrome and The Fly and just sort of wanting to examine all of his movies. But when I saw Shivers, I do remember this feeling of thinking, oh yeah, it's his first movie and just being really crude and kind of dismissing it. But then, yeah, having that feeling where it's like, oh, I could just see where he went from here. Like he did have those ideas, and I forgave a lot watching it again, because as you said, like The Thing is basically Carpenter's first big studio film. So he had the money, he had all these resources, whereas Cronenberg, it was his first feature-length movie, and he didn't have that much money. And watching him talk about the film, he was just looking around thinking, I don't even know what some of these crew members do. I remember saying that. I think it's so funny. And just him saying, I don't know if I could do this. And him actually saying he's watching rushes and thinking, I can't be a director. This is awful. And then as the days went on, he goes, oh yeah, you know what? I can do this. I am getting better at figuring all this stuff out. I gotta say, even with really limited budgets, like the special effects, like they do exactly what you need. You see these parasite things, however crude they are, and all of those, obviously they're practical effects, but part of that moment when the two women are kissing and it goes from one throat to another, and it just looks amazing. It's done with bladders and balloons. I was like, wow, you use your resources to the perfect level. Like you achieved the feeling that you wanted to it.
Yeah, even the scene where the insurance salesman who's infected, that guy, the guy who looks like Vincent Cassell, the scene where he's lying on bed and his nightshirt is open and you see his stomach bubbling with the parasites inside. Maybe my eye is not trained as well as it should be, but it looks seamless between like his body and wherever the prosthetics were, that they could just sit and hold the camera on it and you could just watch like the parasites bubble in and out. I thought that was really great. The parasites themselves were a little schlocky
Mm-hmm.
looking, but everything else was really amazing. And I heard Cronenberg in an interview talking about how, I think he said essentially budget wise they were okay with spending money on special effects because that's what sells the movie, right? They can put that in the trailer, on the poster, or whatever. But with dialogue scenes, they, like, I guess the producers were essentially like, one take, get it done, move on. Like, don't waste your time on dialogue scenes. Spend your time on the special effects scenes. And you can kind of tell that. Super low budget for Cronenberg. I think they spent, was it like $185,000, I want to say.
Like the biggest scandal of this, of course, was that it was government money that funded it.
Right.
This is the infamous article from Saturday Night Magazine. You should know how bad this movie is after all you paid for it.
Right.
The thing about it, it was such a huge scandal because at the time, even now, I guess, it's like, oh, if government money is going to make a film, it should be about our culture and not some schlocky horror movie. But of course, this schlocky horror movie made the most money ever of any Canadian funded film at the time.
Right. And that was kind of the point of the tax shelter. I mean, once it started happening, people were like, "Oh, where's the art movies?" But that wasn't, as far as I understand, the point of the tax shelter. It was just to produce content, get commercial films out there. It wasn't necessarily to represent Canada to Canadians like the mandate of the NFB or whatever. They wanted output and it worked. There was statistics, something like 3 feature films were made in Canada, I want to say in like 1974. By 1979, it went up to 77 films were produced in that year. So that's a success. They just weren't expecting them to be horror and comedy and sex comedies and things. But that wasn't really the mandate. It was sort of, as far as the tax shelter policy, it worked and it made a ton of money. Like, and that's another thing that's interesting. We're talking about comparing the two. You've got Shivers, which was made for $185,000, and I think ended up making something like $5 million. And part of that was because of the controversy, I'm sure. Then you have Carpenter's The Thing, which I think was about a $15 million budget and only made in its first run about $19 million because of the time that was in, whether it's E.T.'s fault, whether it's, the 80s, or just like the nihilism of it just wasn't suited to the Reagan era America of the time. They weren't feeling that sort of dark nihilistic attitude. The periods in which they were reviewed completely had an effect on their financial success. But when I was watching Shivers, I instantly started thinking about the movie High Rise, Ben Wheatley's film High Rise, based on J.G. Ballard's book. And I knew the book, like the film High Rise came out maybe about like 6 years ago or something like that, but I knew the book had been written way earlier. So I was like, oh, I wonder if this is an inspiration for Cronenberg, because I know Cronenberg has made a Ballard book into a film before, Crash, right? So I was like, oh, I wonder if this is just like his loose adaptation, and I just never knew it. So I looked into it. Complete coincidence. They were being written at the exact same time. Ballard was writing High Rise, Cronenberg was writing Shivers. I just can't believe the connection between like these people trapped in this self-sufficient high-rise building. Like that in itself blows my mind. Obviously one's more about like class conflict, I think, and the other one's about infection and sexual repression. Then when you watch Ben Wheatley's High Rise, he like combines both of them because obviously he's adapting Ballard, but there's these Cronenberg moments, like there's a trailer for High Rise that kind of pays homage to the first couple minutes of Shivers with that voiceover describing this state-of-the-art apartment complex. And it's like a direct reference to Cronenberg in that moment.
Cronenberg always had this obsession with diseases, and the fly obviously is the big one where it's something is taking over the body, but it could be a good thing. And that's what's the biggest difference between these movies, where the scientists particularly mention that the parasite could be a good thing. It could take over your body. You could fix a kidney. You're sharing something with it, but it saved you, so it's a mutual beneficial relationship. Whereas with the thing, it's like, no, this is the last thing you want. We can't let this take over us. For Shivers, it basically takes over everybody in the complex, and people seem pretty happy. Like they're just saying, join us. I mean, it's not people; it's the parasite talking. But there are worse ways to go. It's like, oh, it's just going to be a world where everybody's enjoying themselves and they're all sexual and they're all having fun, even though their personalities are sort of gone. Whereas with the thing, there's never a notion at all if it's being a positive thing. It's this foreign thing that's attacking us, and that's obviously closer to what we're going through now. I always find it interesting that the way we're dealing with this COVID-19 is we have to assume that everybody has it, and you're preventing it from spreading anymore. And with the thing, the biggest thing about that is the paranoia, where you don't know who has it. So a couple of the scientists, they do presume, it's like, well, we're going to make our own meals. We have to be very, very careful, which is very close to what we're going through.
Yeah, especially when you mentioned from now on, everybody should make their own meals and eat out of cans. That was like the first 2 days of lockdown. It was like, I'm not buying any fresh food. Give me a box of rice, canned beans, whatever. Yeah, it's definitely more, there's more connections to right now. Although I must say, I live in a high-rise building. You don't. So when I was watching Shivers, there was a little bit of relevance there in terms of that. Because like, whereas in Shivers, they don't really need to go anywhere because it's like a self-sufficient building on an isolated island. People just don't want to go anywhere right now, especially in the building. So in me, I feel like I want to go out less and less. So yeah, being trapped in these little rooms with all these same people on all these different floors felt pretty accurate for me. But yeah, the whole like paranoia, lack of trust amongst people that you think that you know is definitely much more present in the thing, and felt like really, really relatable. Yeah, I mean, it's just a difference of attitudes towards the idea of infection, like Carpenter, and the story that it's based on. It's an external threat that then causes this level of distrust or like loss of self-identity. But with Cronenberg, obviously he's much more takes like a much more cerebral Freudian attitude towards infection and manifestations within the body, and so it's all internal. So although this parasite is its own kind of seemingly sentient being, it was created by a scientist and put inside of someone's body, so it never existed beyond us. It always existed within us. So yeah, there's just like different, again, it's like a similar exploration of infection, but from one internally, one externally, and then what happens once those threats are released. But at the same time, it does have that crossover where it's like you don't necessarily know who has it. It's a little more obvious in Shivers because there's a little bit of a crazy eye going on when somebody's got it, or the doctor's girlfriend starts having that weird speech about erotic dreams. Whereas with like the thing, right up until the end, you have no idea. There's really no signifier that says, okay, this person might be infected. It's definitely a lot more difficult to pinpoint.
Actually, okay, I'm gonna play a clip of the nurse talking about how good this disease could possibly be.
A disease is the love of two alien kinds of creatures for each other. That even dying is an act of eroticism. That talking is sexual. That breathing is sexual. That even to physically exist is sexual.
The way that's delivered, it's supposed to be a dream, like she's literally telling a dream, but nobody talks like this. It's just, but Cronenberg writes a bunch of scenes in future movies like that because it's all about him trying to express his ideas of, well, everything that you believe might not be true. There's other possibilities of our bodies. There's other notions of what could be good and what is bad. So open up your mind, which I think is fantastic. And I don't know that I really blame the actress, but
I'm comparing like dreamy, sleepy speech of the infected nurse with the scientist. That actor, he has such a like a almost like a blasé delivery of it, or like a funny delivery of it, that it works. Like I didn't find it silly him just explaining, equal parts venereal disease and aphrodisiac. Get in touch with your primal self. I didn't really find it distracting in the way that as soon as the nurse started to go into that speech, I did. So yeah, maybe it's just he needs a certain type of actor. That's probably why he works with a lot of the same people over and over again, because they can take these kind of over the top abstract speeches and make them a little bit more grounded.
but do you think that Cronenberg is saying that the parasites are good?
Yeah, I mean, well, see, so this is when we talk of like successful. This is where I have a little bit of problem with Shivers, because I've read something that said like Cronenberg wants you to take the point of view of the disease in this case. So if you're taking the point of view of the disease, this is a great thing. It's not a nihilistic ending. It's an optimistic ending. The disease is going to get out. Everybody's in their cars at the end, driving to mainland Montreal. It's successful if you're taking it from the point of view of the disease. Got everyone in the building. Great. I also don't like, I can understand he likes that point of view and the challenge for himself as like a writer and filmmaker, and for us as an audience, but at the same time the tone of the ending is not optimistic. It's doom. He gets overcome with all the infected people in the pool, the Dr. Roger totally taken over. And that last scene, as you see Dr. Roger leading the caravan of cars full of residents driving out of the island, it doesn't feel like a tone of optimism. It feels like a tone of nihilism. So I'm not sure how successful that is. Do you know what I mean? Like the balance is a little off.
It's like they've won, and if you extrapolate it, even if he's saying these parasites could be a good thing, but these people aren't acting like humans anymore. Like humanity is lost. Maybe that is a Cronenberg's view too, or maybe they should lose. But it's just so. I mean, more than anything, people would look at it as an exploitation film. There's a lot of sexuality in it. It's still a couple of shocking scenes where, in this day and age, you would never get away with that scene with the elevator where this little girl gets attacked. And I don't know what happens in there, something horrendous. But a really young girl turns into this insane monster. And I thought that was the epitome of what shouldn't be in movies. Well, what you would never see in movies anymore until you see him running down the stairs and you saw those two girls unleash.
Oh my god.
To rewound, I'm like, wait, what am I seeing? Like, I don't remember that at all for some reason. Maybe I blocked it, but I could not believe that shot. And the same with the character. He looks, turns, and goes, oh,
Like,
out. He's just like, oh my god.
yeah. He almost doesn't even react at that point. He just sees the two kids on the leash come out the door, and he's like, you know what? I'm done. He doesn't like he doesn't scream. He doesn't really look scared. He just looks like, this is too much. I'm going. I'm giving up. And he just walks right back in the other direction. It was kind of amazing. But I mean, yeah, you definitely wouldn't be able to get away with that. Plus the apartment he goes into where it's the older man and he's like, do you know my daughter? And then they start making out. I was like, what is happening? What is this movie? But at the same time, although those scenes were all super disturbing, especially maybe this goes less so for the elevator scene, the scene with like the weird incest moment and the kids on the leash, it was kind of exciting in the sense that like it's so boundary pushing that, and it's so weird that I kind of appreciated it. Like it was like that moment when you watch The Shining and Wendy's running through the halls and she opens a door and you see the dog costume man. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So when I saw the two kids on the leash, it was one of those moments where I was just like, oh God, what has this become? But it's both like terrifying and disturbing, but also kind of exciting in like a narrative way, I guess.
It's amazing for his first movie that he was pushing the boundaries. Like he never talks about the company saying, well, you have to make it with a lot of nudity and blood. He wrote the script way before he got the funding from the Canadian government. So it was there. I was like, yeah, the only reason it took so long to make was they didn't want him to direct it. A lot of the actors hadn't worked that much, and he was desperate for anybody. I remember him saying they just put out a cattle call for all the people in the apartment. Like he couldn't be choosy. Whereas John Carpenter had an unbelievable cast.
Yeah.
A lot of them may not have done movies before, but they're all theater actors, so they were very seasoned and they were very good. And in all the interviews, like they all loved working on the movie, and there was that camaraderie, and they were able to rehearse for 2 weeks to get a feeling of each other. And I love how they point out that there was obviously no female characters in the movie, but there's no female crew members either. I think there was one where she got pregnant and was replaced by a man. That was good in the sense of it did give this certain feeling of the set all the time. And, you know, he does say that human nature with men, when there's women around, men just posture for women. But there's none around, so they're just being guys. They don't have to worry about that. And I think it worked really well.
I'm not sure about that, but for me, and from an analytical point of view, I don't love it when women are removed from stories, generally speaking, but in this instance, I think it's an opportunity to like take the themes of infection and isolation, the idea of masculinity, and they don't really know each other when it comes to a point where they're standing around, I think it was Fuchs's alien body at that point, and they're all just looking at each other like, well, how will we know if we're real or not? Like, how do you know if I'm me, and how do I know if you're you? And these are people who are supposed to have spent who knows how long together in these intimate settings, and not once did they say something like share a memory. And for all we know, the alien might have those memories, but they never really get into that. So it's like they're all kind of isolated from each other. And I guess you could go into like a gender studies point of view of like, what does that say about American masculinity at the time?
But I think that is one of the biggest things about the thing, that even the actors say while they're shooting it, like it's never clearly defined how it really works.
Yeah.
It says it creates a perfect representation of you. The question even the actors said was, if you are the thing, do you know that you're the thing?
Right.
And they couldn't ever agree. And Carpenter wouldn't say either. Even he said, I don't know.
But I think that's good though, and it works because there's no risk that they'll hint at you. And the idea that as we watch it, we all have no idea. We're just trying to piece it together as much as they are. It makes the reception of it a lot more effective as an audience member. And also just to go back to sort of like the idea of masculinity, it's a horror movie where the bodies that are being, so to speak, penetrated, broken down, attacked, they're all male bodies. And it's such a unique perspective, especially for someone like Carpenter, who, I mean, if you know about horror film studies and the final girl theory, Halloween is a big part of what people reference when they talk about the stereotypes or the trope of the final girl. So you have him like making another horror movie where that trope is completely erased, and we have to look at it again from the invasion of a male body. And it's just so unique in horror movies, and I always get really excited to try to think about it from that perspective. It's like, what does it mean when it is the male body that's on display and being attacked in a violent and bloody way, and what kind of like interesting ideas can come out of that.
At the beginning, when the Norwegians are speaking, they're saying real dialogue. And of course, all these Americans don't know what they're saying, but somebody translated and said, they could have been ready for this if they understood what they were saying, because apparently the dialogue translates to, get the hell out of there. That's not a dog. It's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. Get away, you idiots.
What? That's amazing.
But they don't know that. And me, I never knew that he said that. And I thought, well, there you go. If they knew some other languages.
But again, it's like, it's another way to look at this theme of like isolation. So you've got this American station that seems pretty on its own, but the Norwegians can't be that far away if they can travel by helicopter. They've obviously never worked together, never shared information. I mean, even McCready, Kurt Russell's character, over and over again refers to them as being Swedish. Like, he can't even tell the difference between Norwegian and Swedish. And I think Blair, that's a Wilford Brimley's character, keeps correcting him. And it's just like, they're so insulated geographically and culturally that it ends up being a disadvantage to them. And I guess you could get it, you could do sort of political readings about what that means and what it meant for, American political interests at the time in the 80s. But it's just like another way that isolation ends up being this major theme in the film, and is actually, they would have been able to stop it if they weren't so isolated from the world around them. Yeah, I didn't know that dialogue. That's awesome.
It was 82, so it was like the other. It's just, they're just foreigners. We don't care. They're all the same to us. And
but that's why it's sort of like gets really interesting, because once it gets into their camp, then is Carpenter making comments about like what that kind of isolation attitude will do to a culture. It's generally nihilistic. Sort of reading a more progressive political attitude towards isolationism of the US at the time. There's just so many layers they can get into in the subtext of the thing because of these little elements. I think it just kind of works so perfectly. And I can't, like, some of the reviews and stuff of it, I just don't get it at all. The reviews of the time, a lot of the ones I was reading, I was like, I can't believe how you can't see how this is good. I just really don't understand the point of view of reviewers who saw this movie in 82 and thought it was garbage.
There's such like hatred and venom towards it too. Maybe it is because of the Reagan era, and it was like, we don't want to feel this depressed or something.
Yeah, they all seem to really like the special effects, was it Bottin? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, Rob Bottin.
Who, I might be wrong, but I think I read that he was 21 when he did these, which is bonkers because it's amazing.
Yeah, and he slept on set for like 6 months because there was just so much work, and you're not supposed to show these special effects in bright light because it looks fake. But Bottin is like, it'll look amazing, just trust me. And then it did.
Yeah. Let me just read some of these reviews. So, like, called it the quintessential moron movie of the 80s. Thought the plot was boring. Like, that's the opposite of what I thought. Even watching it now, it just straight into action. Starts with the helicopter chasing that dog. I mean, there's a little scene of the spaceship, which is a little hokey at the beginning, but and then from the moment that dog arrives to the station, it feels like the pacing is really on point. Like, there's no real lulls. Like, things just start happening more and more and more. There's no breaks. Like, how could you possibly think this is boring? It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
A lot of times in sci-fi movies, and obviously these are sci-fi horror movies in a sense, that there'll be a scientist character. And a lot of times they'll either be the one that's totally correct or the one that you dismiss because they're not being realistic. The Thing, I guess Wilford Brimley's character Blair is the one that you're supposed to believe, like, this guy's going to tell us what to do. And he immediately realizes humanity must be saved, so we must die. Yeah, in Shivers, the parasite is created by a scientist to try to help humanity. But from his actions at the beginning, he realizes this is not a good thing. That's why he kills himself, and what he thought was the one person who was infected. So they both sort of come on the side where the scientists come on the side as like, yeah, this probably is not a good thing. But
and they both try to do what they can to contain it, but they're both infected, right? Like, or I guess the doctor in Shivers, you don't know that he's infected, but they do make a weird reference to him having a relationship with her when she was like 12 or 13. Is that, do you remember that?
it's not good.
Totally demented. There's a lot of problems. Shivers is slightly problematic in a few different ways, and that's just one of them. And the other thing is like the idea that, this disease is supposed to be, take the point of view of the disease and it's an optimistic ending. But there's so many horrific things happening in those different attacks. Sometimes I feel like I don't know if he totally knew what he wanted to get across.
For sure.
And again, but that could speak to like it's his first movie and all that other stuff. But we don't know that maybe he's infected, maybe he wasn't. The scientists in that respect are trying to do the right thing. They both fail. So I don't know if they're both making the same statement about the power of scientists.
Unleashing something is like, oh, geez, you can't contain it. Like once it's out of the bottle, there's no stopping it. But they try and fail miserably.
And I think they both, by touching on those characters, they both kind of question authority figures in a way.
It's what I kind of like, that there isn't that thing where, like in the original Thing, there is that scientist. It's like, no, we have to make sure it's alive because we need to examine it. Not in this movie. Yeah, after that first examination, we realize this thing is dangerous. We have to get rid of it. And I love when they trap McCready outside. It's like, what if we wrong about him? And Child's like, then we wrong. It's like we're gonna kill innocent people if we have to, which is what Blair says. Like he thinks everybody has to die for humanity to be saved.
Yeah, but even in that moment, I can see why Child reacted that way. At that point, it was so far gone. He wasn't taking any chances, and I don't blame him for that. But like I think in the original Thing from Another Planet, the subtext was like distrust of science versus trust in the military complex or military institutions. They're the heroes. They'll see us right. Scientists, they created atomic bombs and whatnot, and they got us into this mess. So it kind of speaks to the time in which that was made. Whereas like this one, to the end of that was at the beginning of the Cold War. This is at the end of the Cold War, in the period of American history where I think it's safe to say everyone was pretty dejected about what had gone on since the 50s, the 60s, and 70s with Watergate, Vietnam War. Distrust in that military complex took precedent. So the scientists aren't as demonized in Carpenter's version. They're trying to do their best, but they're out of luck. Like they can't do anything except sacrifice themselves, I guess, in some way, which is still a really nihilistic point of view. So I think it works. Like it makes sense to sort of remove that aspect of it. Whereas like Shivers, you still have that element of like science gone awry. Like this guy who thought, oh, I can make humanity better for this weird sexy program which doesn't really make sense, and it just released this monster. Like what do you think about Shivers as sort of a parable of like, I don't know, middle class repression?
That is a lot of what Cronenberg examines there on as well, where there is a lot of repression. People don't do what they want and need something external to sort of spark that. The fact that it releases their sexuality, I think, says a lot too, because that is what people repress the most.
Mm-hmm. And it's so Freudian, right, which plays into his style.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like the endings of both of these movies, they're both pretty nihilistic, where one of the greatest things about the thing is the ending because it's so ambiguous, where you're not sure if either Childs or McCready are the thing, if it is going to spread, or if they've defeated it. Like, you just don't get a sense of relief. John Carpenter has been asked it so many times that he keeps changing his answers. Every time I look at a different article, he goes, oh, it's very obvious who's the thing. Or he says, I don't know. Because of the prequel, people re-examine things. Like, it's just endless, which I love. But they'll say, Childs is clearly not the thing because he has metal in his ear. And because of the 2011 prequel sequel remake, that's not allowed. It's like, no, that doesn't count. Like, that was not part of the rules. And on the commentary, Carpenter flat out says, yeah, I don't know if Childs is the thing or not. And right over the end credits, Carpenter and Russell just talk about, so, the thing was just trying to survive. If we went to another planet, we would want to survive and do whatever we have.
That's very, like, Cronenbergian.
Yeah, it's like, well, it's just an organism that's doing that. We would do the same thing if we went to another planet. It's this interesting sudden swerve at the end of all this, saying, well, it wasn't a bad thing, but that's what we do as a species to survive, destroy other species.
Do we want to watch the trailer, or do we want to?
I love both of these trailers. I think they're both.
Yeah.
The thing begins with.
Mayday. Mayday. Anyone hear me? Over. This is U.S. Station 31. You read me? Found something in the ice. We need some help down here. Can anybody hear me? We found something. We found something.
And it just sort of goes into McCready talking about how the thing works in terms of infection, and just a bunch of crazy shots. And it's like, that's exactly what I want. I want you to tell it set up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you never hear that. I mean, maybe it'd be good if it was the translation of the Norwegian helicopter that we only get to hear the Norwegian version. But like, I like the beginning and I like the end of the trailer. The beginning where you just hear that voiceover. It's like a wide white panel on a black screen that gets smaller and smaller. And again, it just reminded me, like, the beginning of the film. You start on this vast white landscape, and then you slowly move inside into this confined space that really hits home that claustrophobia. So I just really loved that part. I think they show a little too much of the thing. They had that McCready voiceover with all those fast scenes. It feels really exciting and scary. I just wish they hadn't shown Alien Fuchs. That scene, and when you watch the movie and he just kind of stone-faced turns and looks up at McCready and he lifts his weird alien claws, and that's when you know for sure, he's gone. That's just such a shocking moment that I was so disappointed to see it in the trailer. It just would have ruined it for everybody.
Okay, you play the Shivers one. It's only a minute, but I want to play the whole thing because I love old school voiceover trailers, and it has the best last line ever.
If you think you're not afraid of the dark, if you think you have a strong stomach, if you feel nothing can shock you, if you say you don't scare easily, if you believe you've seen everything, then prepare yourself for a motion picture that takes you beyond fear, beyond your wildest nightmares, and brings you face to face with terror, beyond the power of priest or science to exorcise. They possess men, women, and children, and drive them to acts of unbelievable horror. No one is safe from them. No power on earth can stop them. The only escape is death. If this picture doesn't make you scream and squirm, you'd better see a psychiatrist. Quick.
That is the best.
So funny.
I love those old school trailers, and the fact that they show the two kids on a leash too.
That was shocking. But whereas with the Thing trailer, I was disappointed at how much they showed. I feel like it works with this one because when you first start to watch it, it just feels like a classic horror movie trailer. You know, that voiceover talking about being scared, and just feels really kind of typical and unoriginal. But then once they start to show like all these weird moments, that's when in the trailer you're like, oh, this is so much weirder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that end tagline is really good compared to the end tagline of the Thing trailer, which is "Man is the warmest place to hide." Yeah, I think Shivers definitely wins that round.
I say so too. It's a perfect way to get people in the theaters. That trailer, it was amazing. And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess with both of them, it doesn't like ruin the plot because there's not much to ruin in that respect. But they're both amazing. I love them.
Yeah, they're both really good compared to the last ones we watched. So yeah, what do you think?
I think The Thing is better at showing the danger of infection and disease and a better sense of paranoia. But I love how Shivers goes the other way and says, well, this could be a good thing. So I do appreciate that. But in terms of how we're relating now, I definitely say The Thing would be more representative of what we're going through now and all those themes and reality that unfortunately we're living through.
Yeah, and even without the comparison to like watching it in 2020, watching both of them now, I think, and again, this could be because of, first feature, lack of experience sort of thing, establishing a sense of like you said, paranoia, isolation. I think The Thing does that really well. It really kind of sets these levels where you can read all these subtexts into it, the comparison between the landscape and the inside and all these contrasts and stuff. I think textually hit those marks a little bit better than Shivers, but I think the spread of infection is, I would say maybe goes to Shivers because it's so fast, so rapid. It gets so out of control compared to The Thing. Of course, there's a lot more people in the building, but I just liked the pace at which once it started to spread in Shivers, it was just everybody, like you couldn't get away. You open your door to deliver food and some old lady grabs you. Like, whereas with The Thing, it kind of slows down at one point. There's a bunch of infections at the beginning and then it kind of slows down, and it becomes more about lack of trust and paranoia. So I kind of liked that element of Shivers.
Yeah, for sure. They're both really good, and people should definitely check out both of them, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Join us next time when we look at The Revenge Movie with Road to Perdition and John Wick. Thank you for listening.